The most devastating traps are never set by your enemies. They are carefully designed by the hands you held when you were learning how to walk. My name is Iris Thornton. I am 29 years old, and for my entire life, my maternal relationship felt less like a family bond and more like a high-stakes corporate environment where I was permanently underperforming. My mother, Eleanor Thornton, is a highly influential corporate consultant known for her absolute chill, precision, and a total obsession with social status. To Eleanor, children were not independent human beings. They were premium public relations assets designed to elevate her own standing within the city's high society circles. From the day I turned 18, I was constantly measured against her unyielding, flawless expectations. When I left my university lectures to pursue a career as a senior financial risk auditor for Meridian Global Capital, a private investment firm, my mother treated my choice as a personal insult. "An auditor, Iris," she had said during a high-profile family dinner, her voice dripping with chilly, elegant condescension. "You are merely calculating the numbers behind other people's grand achievements. It's so painfully invisible." But my invisible world was exactly where I excelled. My job was to analyze massive corporate systems, look past the beautiful presentations, detect the hidden structural anomalies, and dismantle corporate deception before it caused a catastrophic collapse. I spent my days reading data patterns and predicting human behavior under immense stress. I never expected that my professional auditing skills would be the only thing keeping me standing when my own mother decided to execute a hostile takeover of my personal life. The conflict reached a critical breaking point when I met Silas Montgomery, a brilliant, exceptionally mature 31-year-old architectural designer who had recently signed a massive contract to design the new sustainable district for Athelgard Horizons. Silas was calm, fiercely protective, and possessed a quiet, unbothered wisdom that completely neutralized Eleanor's psychological games. For the first time in 29 years, I felt entirely safe, valued, and understood. 6 months ago, Silas knelt down on a quiet, snow-covered terrace overlooking the city skyline and asked me to marry him. I said yes without a single millisecond of hesitation. But to Eleanor, my happiness was a direct threat to her absolute control. Eleanor had always intended me to marry the son of her primary business associate, a match that would have secured her minority shares in a massive real estate trust. Silas's independence and his absolute refusal to bow to her social influence made him an obstacle that needed to be systematically eliminated. When standard psychological pressure failed to make Silas back away, Eleanor decided to deploy her ultimate weapon, my past. Every human being has a chapter in their life they wish they could edit. For me, it was a period during my early 20s when I was struggling to pay for my final university terms. Desperate and entirely isolated from my family's wealth, I had taken a position as a private data researcher for a controversial corporate restructuring group called Vanguard Legacy. During my short time there, I discovered that the firm's senior management was engaged in massive, unauthorized data manipulation. Instead of staying quiet, I quietly collected the encrypted transaction logs, walked directly into a regulatory hearing, and blew the whistle. The fallout was immense. The firm collapsed, and while I was legally cleared of any wrongdoing and praised by the financial committee, the media scrutiny was intense. It was a time of immense emotional exhaustion, a chapter of deep stress that I had entirely closed and moved past. Eleanor, however, had kept the archived media files, the unedited transcripts, and the old corporate non-disclosure agreements locked away in her private safe like a collection of tactical weapons. Yesterday afternoon, while Silas was attending a solo design review near my mother's neighborhood, Eleanor invited him to her private residence under the pretense of discussing our wedding registry. She didn't bring out catalogs. Instead, she laid out the full, unedited dossier of my past financial crisis on the mahogany table. She painted me not as a brave whistleblower, but as a compromised, dangerous liability who had destroyed a multi-million-dollar firm out of pure, calculated malice. She told my fiancé everything, using every ounce of her professional manipulation to make me look like a deceitful stranger who had masked her dark history behind a fake smile. I spent the entire evening sitting in our dark living room, my phone resting on the coffee table, my chest tight with an icy, paralyzing anxiety. I knew exactly what Eleanor's data looked like out of context. I knew how easily it could break a relationship built on trust. At exactly 8:45 p.m., the front door lock clicked, the heavy brass handle turned, and Silas stepped into the apartment. Silas stepped into the dim entryway, shedding his heavy wool coat. The apartment was entirely still, illuminated only by the faint amber glow of the city lights cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat rigidly on the sofa, my fingers locked tightly together, waiting for the storm that my mother had so meticulously engineered. Silas set his briefcase down, his movements deliberate and entirely calm. He didn't look angry. His expression held a profound, quiet maturity as he walked over and sat down beside me on the sofa. The space between us felt heavy, with the weight of Eleanor's dark dossier, yet he didn't pull away. Instead, he reached out and gently unclasped my trembling hands, wrapping his fingers around mine. "You're freezing, Iris," he said softly, his voice a steady, grounding anchor in the dark. I looked at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, searching his face for any sign of doubt or resentment. "Silas, my mother called me after you left her house. She told me what she did. She showed you the Vanguard legacy records, the entire investigation, the media scandal, the—" "Iris," Silas interrupted gently, squeezing my hand to halt my spiraling thoughts. He offered a faint, incredibly reassuring smile. "I already knew." The words hung in the quiet room, completely defusing the paralyzing panic that had consumed me for hours. I blinked, momentarily stripped of my auditing vocabulary. You already knew? How? I never gave you the full details of that case." Silas leaned back slightly, his eyes locking at mine with absolute clarity. "Iris, I'm an architectural designer. Before I enter a multi-million-dollar partnership or sign a lifetime contract for a massive development like Ethelgard Horizons, I run a comprehensive structural analysis. Do you honestly think I wouldn't do the same before proposing to the woman I intend to spend the rest of my life with?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive and set it on the coffee table. I reviewed the entire public regulatory transcript 2 weeks after our very first date. I didn't do it out of suspicion. I did it because I wanted to understand the brilliant financial risk auditor who looked past the surface of every corporate balance sheet. I read every line of your testimony, Iris. I saw the extreme stress you were under, the absolute isolation you faced when you stood up against that board, and the immense courage it took for a 23-year-old researcher to blow the whistle on a systemic fraud ring. Tears of sheer relief welled in my eyes, blurring the sharp lines of the city skyline outside. The weapon Eleanor had spent years sharpening to cut me down had completely missed its mark. Your mother didn't present a shocking revelation today, Iris. She presented a poorly framed narrative. She spent 2 hours trying to convince me that your integrity was a dangerous corporate liability. She wanted me to look at you and see a deceitful stranger, but all she managed to do was reveal her own profound malice. What did you say to her? I whispered, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. Silas's eyes flashed with a sharp, wise, and entirely unbothered intelligence. I told her that her architectural blueprint was deeply flawed. I thanked her for her hospitality, told her that I admired your courage even more now that I knew the toxic environment you grew up in, and walked out of her estate. But Eleanor doesn't realize that a strategist doesn't just survive an attack, they map out the counter-offensive. He picked up the flash drive from the table and pushed it into my hand. Your mother thinks she holds all the leverage because she's trying to force you into that real estate merger for her own financial gain. But while she was busy auditing your past, I spent the afternoon looking into her current consulting portfolios. It turns out Eleanor's pristine reputation has a few massive structural cracks of her own. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, casting a sharp golden light across the architectural blueprints spread over our dining table. Silas sat with his laptop open, while I plugged the encrypted flash drive into my own terminal. The panic of the previous night had completely dissolved, replaced by the familiar, cold precision of a senior risk auditor. When Eleanor was reviewing your past, Silas said, pointing to a highlighted section on his screen, she was completely blind to the fact that her own current project data routes through the same municipal regulatory channels I use for Ethelgard Horizons. Look at the asset valuation trends for her primary real estate trust over the last 18 months. I leaned in, my eyes instantly tracking the numbers. My auditing instincts flared as I noticed a series of sharp, unnatural anomalies in the financial reporting. These aren't standard market fluctuations, I murmured, my fingers flying across the keyboard to trace the transaction origins. She's artificially inflating the value of the minority shares she wants to merge. She's trying to force me into a marriage with her associate's son because without that merger's liquidity injection, her entire real estate portfolio faces a massive, catastrophic margin call. It was a classic corporate deception. Eleanor had spent months presenting herself as an untouchable elite matriarch, trying to save her daughter from a compromised past, when in reality, she was a desperate investor trying to use her daughter as a financial shield to cover up her own impending ruin. She scheduled a high-profile boardroom luncheon tomorrow at the Aegis Plaza Club. She invited the senior trustees of the real estate merger, her business associates, and several high-ranking municipal zoning directors. She intends to publicly announce the preliminary merger parameters, and she fully expects you to show up broken and compliant after her psychological attack yesterday. She thinks I'm going to walk in there begging for her approval, desperate to keep her from telling the rest of the world about my Vanguard legacy whistleblowing, I said, a slow, wise smile developing on my lips. Exactly, Silas replied, closing his laptop with a firm, decisive click. She thinks she holds the master key to your reputation. She has no idea that we've already rewritten the entire security protocol. For the next 24 hours, we didn't send a single text message or make a single call to Eleanor. We let the silence stretch out, allowing her to marinate in a false sense of absolute victory. I compiled the verified audit logs of her inflated valuations, formatting them into a pristine, legally airtight compliance report. Meanwhile, Silas drafted a structural advisory note demonstrating how Eleanor's proposed real estate trust directly violated municipal zoning laws. On Wednesday afternoon, I dressed in a sharp, tailored navy corporate suit, adjusting my silver watch. Silas stood beside me, immaculate in his charcoal designer blazer, his expression holding an unshakable, protective confidence. We walked out of our apartment and drove directly towards the Aegis Plaza Club. Eleanor had spent 29 years trying to mold me into a passive asset for her public relations portfolio. She truly believed that my past was a weapon she could use to control me forever. She was about to learn that when you try to blackmail an auditor, you'd better make sure your own books are perfectly balanced. The private dining room of the Aegis Plaza Club was a portrait of corporate luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung over a long mahogany table where 10 of the city's most influential real estate trustees, municipal zoning directors, and high society investors sat. At the head of the table stood my mother, Eleanor Thornton, looking radiant, immaculate, and entirely victorious in a sharp ivory suit. As Silas and I walked through the double glass doors, the conversation subsided. Eleanor looked up, her eyes flashing with a sudden triumphant gleam. She looked at my calm posture, then at Silas's steady hand on the small of my back, fully believing that we had arrived broken, humbled, and desperate to buy her silence after her psychological attack. "Ah, Iris, Silas," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth as she gestured toward 2 empty seats at the far end of the table. "We were just discussing the preliminary parameters of the real estate merger. I was just telling our associates how critical it is to have transparent and untarnished management moving forward." The subtle threat in her voice was entirely clear to me. She was letting me know that a single word from her about my Vanguard legacy past could end my career at Meridian Global Capital. I didn't take my seat. Instead, I walked directly to the front of the room, standing beside the main digital projector screen. Silas stood calmly behind me, his arms crossed, his unbothered posture radiating an absolute, dangerous confidence. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, my voice cutting through the room with a crisp, chilling authority that surprised everyone at the table. "But before we finalize any merger parameters, as a senior financial risk auditor, I believe this board needs a complete, verified structural overview of the assets in question." Eleanor's elegant smile stiffened, her eyes narrowing sharply. "Iris, this is a private luncheon, not a corporate audit. Take your seat and let the senior trustees handle the data." "Actually, Eleanor, the trustees are exactly the ones who need to see this data," I said smoothly, tapping my tablet. The projector screen flickered to life, instantly replacing her glossy promotional slides with a complex, mathematically airtight financial spreadsheet. The room went dead silent as the senior investors leaned forward, their eyes locking on to a sequence of highlighted red numbers showing massive, unnatural asset inflation. "What is the meaning of this?" one of the primary real estate trustees demanded, looking directly at Eleanor. "These valuation trends don't match the portfolio reports you submitted to our firm last month." "Because the reports submitted to you were artificially manipulated," I stated calmly, looking directly into my mother's pale face. "Over the past 18 months, Eleanor has been systematically inflating the value of her minority shares to cover an impending multi-million-dollar margin call. She attempted to force this merger to utilize your liquidity as a financial shield to cover her own impending ruin." "This is a fabricated lie," Eleanor snarled, her aristocratic composure completely shattering as she took a step toward me. "You ungrateful, deceitful girl, you think anyone will trust the word of a compromised whistleblower who destroyed Vanguard legacy?" She had played her ultimate card. She waited for the board to look at me with disgust. Instead, Silas stepped forward, opening a leather document folder and sliding a series of stamped municipal documents across the table to the zoning directors. "The board doesn't need to rely on her word, Eleanor," Silas said, his voice a steady, mature anchor. "While you were busy auditing Iris's past, I ran a comprehensive structural analysis on your primary development sites. These certified municipal notes prove that your real estate trust is in direct violation of 3 distinct zoning laws, rendering your entire portfolio entirely illiquid." The boardroom at the Aegis Plaza Club dissolved into absolute chaos. The senior trustees stood up, shouting demands for an immediate asset freeze, while the municipal zoning directors hastily packed their files, their expressions entirely stern and unyielding. Eleanor stood frozen at the head of the table, her hands clutching the edge of the mahogany wood so tightly her manicured nails turned white. "This meeting is officially adjourned," the primary real estate trustee declared, glaring coldly at Eleanor. Our legal division will be issuing a formal corporate subpoena to your consulting firm by tomorrow morning. Do not attempt to move any holding capital." As the investors and directors filed out of the room, the heavy glass doors clicked shut, leaving only the three of us in the sudden, deafening silence. The crystal chandeliers overhead seemed to cast a harsh, unforgiving light over Eleanor's ruined presentation. Eleanor slowly collapsed back into her leather chair. Her pristine ivory jacket suddenly looked like a fragile shroud. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow, stripped of every ounce of her former aristocratic arrogance. "You ruined me, Iris," she whispered, her voice cracking with a mixture of venom and profound disbelief. 29 years I spent building my reputation, and you dismantled it in less than 10 minutes. I am your mother. How could you do this to your own family?" I walked over to the table, picking up my digital tablet, and looked down at her with a calm, wise, and entirely detached composure. "You didn't treat me as family, Iris. You treated me as a leveraged asset. You thought my past was a permanent debt I owed you. You thought you could keep me under your absolute control by threatening to reveal a chapter of my life where I actually showed absolute integrity. But in the world of financial risk auditing, a hidden liability will always destroy the structure that tries to conceal it." Eleanor turned her gaze to Silas, her lips trembling. "You knew? You knew about her past all along, and you still stood by her? You let me look like a fool yesterday." Silas walked up beside me, his hand settling firmly and protectively on my shoulder. His posture radiated an unshakable, mature authority. "I didn't let you look like a fool, Eleanor. You engineered that entirely on your own. You thought you could build a trap out of Iris's honesty, completely blind to the fact that her honesty is exactly why I chose her as my lifetime partner. You designed your entire life on a blueprint of manipulation and status. But a structure built on deception can never withstand an audit by the truth." Without waiting for another word from the woman who had spent 29 years trying to minimize my worth, Silas took my hand. We turned our backs on her ruined empire and walked out of the Aegis Plaza Club together, stepping into the brilliant, unrestricted sunlight of the city. The weight that had rested on my shoulders for nearly 30 years was completely gone, replaced by a profound sense of absolute freedom. My past was no longer a weapon to be used against me. It was simply the foundation that had made me strong enough to claim my own future. As we walked toward our car, Silas looked down at me, a warm, genuinely proud smile clearing away any lingering shadows of the corporate battle we had just won. "So, senior auditor, now that the counter strategy is finalized, what's our next project?" I smiled back, my heart completely at peace. "I believe we have a wedding blueprint to design, Silas, and this time the foundation is going to be entirely flawless." Iris's story is a powerful reminder that true strength lies in honesty and standing by your values, even when faced with unfair pressure from those you should be able to trust. It shows us that a relationship built on open communication and mutual respect can withstand any attempt to create division. Ultimately, focusing on your own path and maintaining your integrity is the most effective way to overcome negativity and move forward into a successful, peaceful future. Thank you for watching this story until the very end. If Iris's story inspired you today, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new upload. See you in our next upload.